Oh, it's doing it. All right. So we're going over organelles and their functions. And so it's going to be important as we're going through this to keep in mind what level of organization we're looking at to be able to visualize it. Okay? And so it's probably really common for people to know cells. They're in your bodies, right? So picture that. Cells in your body. Are you just picturing these little things floating around? It's pretty common for people to say yes to that, or, not say anything, but that's fine. So let's go ahead and look at really what we're talking about here. So I've got my respiratory system on the top left, okay? I've got the lungs, the trachea, that hard thing that is your Adam's apple, that's part of the trachea, and it runs down and then branches when it gets into your lungs. That's what's going to bring air in. That's easy to visualize, right? If I was to take a lung and slice it right in the middle, now this is obviously someone that is no longer with us, or at least their lung is no longer, but there you are. Do you see these tiny little holes in here? Those are huge compared to just how tiny we're talking now. Eventually, these tunnels, these big tubes that lead to smaller tubes that lead to smaller tubes, they're going to terminate in something that looks like these little seeds or grape things. And those are called alveoli. I'm not worried about you remembering that. But these are microscopic. They're really small. Okay, so far so good? What I'm going to show you is an actual slice that goes across one of these little tubes right here in the alveoli, right? So if I kind of right in here, take a cross section of that area. And this is what I get, okay? So this would be the tube part where the air is traveling. This would be the other tissues of the lungs. And so here's an example right here. I think that's it, of one cell. Here's another one. I think it goes to about there. It's hard to tell exactly where one ends and the next begins. We are not just people that have cells in us. We are just cells, right? That's not just something in our bodies, it makes up our bodies. So this is just one example, first of all, to give you an idea of just how tiny they are, but also they make up everything. They are your bodies. What are those dark purple dots? Yes, the nucleus. The nucleus picks up this stain. So there's also all kinds of other organelles in there that you just can't see because they're translucent. I almost think of all of your different membrane-bound organelles. I think of the membrane as like a saran wrap. Really thin, really flexible, and clear. So only by staining it are you actually able to see the different cells and the different parts within the cell. Okay? Does that clarify a little bit at all? Maybe? Yeah? Okay, there we go. And so I kind of started out by showing you these, and you can see these little back and forth. Those are little hairs to help move stuff that might get stuck into your lungs. So that is one purpose of those cilia. Just another picture. These are the actual air sacs themselves. The last one was the tubes that led up to them. So you can see just all of these individual cells, and they kind of overlap each other. These big air sacs right here is where you're taking in oxygen, expelling carbon dioxide. And it's not just us. If we take a look at a cross section of a plant leaf, this is roughly what it looks like. Again, cells. It's what makes up the plant. It's what makes up you guys. All living things have this structure, have these cells that are making them up. Okay? All right, so we're going to go through and look at the various organelles that are within those cells. We're going to bounce back and forth between what we might find in prokaryotes, what we might find in eukaryotes, and then at the end we'll be able to compare them. So I'm going to group them as follows. We're going to start out by the structural, the supporting organelles. We're going to look into the various organelles that have to do with. So looking at the organelles that are involved in supporting those like structural pieces, then we can look at where the DNA is hanging out, Then we can look at how proteins are made, and then we can look at everything having to do with energy. And you guys are active in your learning, right? And so you're mentally trying to fit this in with what you already know. And so in your head right now, think of the 4 structures that all cells are going to have. Raise your hand once you can list 3 of them. Raise your hand as you're thinking the structures that all cells have. And when you're pretty confident that you know 3 of them, your hands are going up. Let's list them out. What are they? Okay, we've got cell membrane, DNA, cytoplasm, and ribosomes. Good. So the 4 categories that I just mentioned of the different organelles that are used in support, well, we'll talk cell membrane there. Having to do with DNA, obviously we'll talk there. The ribosomes have to do with being able to make and modify and move around proteins, so that is kind of in that category. And then the cytoplasm is just everything except for the cell membrane and the nucleus, okay? Let's starting off with the cell membrane. All cells have it. If I take a look in up here, this is 2 cells butted up together. These membranes are incredibly thin. You wouldn't see this under a regular microscope. You're only going to see this under what's called an electron microscope that's able to really zoom in. In fact, it's only 2 molecules thick. 1 molecule, 2 molecules. So it's really thin. It's the thinnest of the organelles, and in your in the approximate sizes in your blue book, this is the smallest organelle that you talked about because it's just so thin. What this is doing is regulating what's coming in and out. Think of it like a bodyguard or a bouncer. Yes, you're cool enough to come in. Nutrients, we want you in here. Weird losery people, toxins, stay out there. We don't want you in our club, right? So when you think cell membrane, think of this bouncer. Hopefully the cell membrane is nicer to the things that can't come in, and don't call them losers. That's good though. All right, next is a cell wall. And that cell wall is exactly what walls of a building do. What do the walls of a skyscraper do? Hold it up. Now, if I took a skyscraper full of people and I took all the people out, is there still a skyscraper there?
Yes.
Yeah. And in the very same way, a lot of times when we look at, for example, cork under a microscope, you don't have any living cells still there. All you have are the cell walls left. So if I took a plant and I took out all the plant cells, you would still see a tree or whatever other plant it was, because that's rude of me to just assume that it's going to be a tree. Do you or I have cell walls? The fact that I can do this is a pretty good indication that I do not have cell walls. The fact that plants are not waving at you like, what up, hey, running over to you when you walk by. First of all, they don't realize how awesome you guys are, but second of all, they have cell walls that really bind them into place. Yeah?
So if you took all this stuff other than a cell wall, like say out of a tree, it'd be like spongy?
Depends. There are some parts of wood that are actually pretty what's called lignified, or have a lot of proteins on the outside that keep them pretty sturdy. Cork is your example of that. The corks that y'all find in wine bottles that I'm sure you're super familiar with. I'm shaking my head no, because I know that none of you know what a cork. Moving on. That is just cell walls. The cells that were alive have now died and disintegrated. So all that's left is cell wall. Imagine you had cork holding your body in place. You're not moving much, right? So so cell walls, they're great. They're gonna really hold things in place, hold it up, give it structural support. But what are you limiting when you have a cell wall? Mobility, okay? The last piece that we didn't look at for these more structural pieces are the cilia and the flagella, and their job is just movement. Whether that's moving other stuff, for example, your lungs. Remember the little tubes that I showed you? And I started, let me see if I can find the picture. No, of course not, because it's not. But they also help the cell overall being able to move. Whatever. Do animal cells ever have flagella? I just showed an animal cell, our lung tissue, with cilia, but do they ever have flagella? Bacteria do. We can picture that pretty readily. But do animal cells? Can you picture any animal cell that maybe has this long flagellum behind it? Yo, this is your one chance to just yell out sperm in school and be right.
Sperm.
There it is. So, yeah, but yeah, that's totes. Oh, you're on the organism level. We're shrinking way down to individual cells, right? So that sperm is one perfect example of a flagella. And why do sperm have flagella? To get from point A to the egg. If they didn't have flagella, they'd just hang around and then die, which is super sad. So having that flagella is what is going to allow them to swim up, albeit in totally random directions, to be able to find the egg. Get that one, I'll come back to it. So instead of having a cell wall, we just said that we don't, right? We have instead a really complex cytoskeleton. Okay, let's break this word down. What would you guess cyto means? Boom. Cell. So cytoskeleton just means cell skeleton. What do you think its function is? Hold up. What do you need? Get it? Support. Yeah, holding you up. If you read the textbook and you see the one little reference I made to, we are really just 100 trillion little baggies full of liquid. And if I took 100 trillion little baggies full of liquid and piled them up, you have a mess of a human. So instead, we've got these very, very complex cytoskeletons that really allow for structural support, hold us all up, hold the different cells together so they don't just fall apart. And then in animals, because we've got such a complex cytoskeleton, we also have what are called centrioles, which are just going to be found in animal cells, and this is responsible for making parts of the cytoskeleton. Now, do plants have cytoskeleton? Yes. It's just not as necessary to expend the energy to make very complex ones when you already have a cell wall. Same for bacteria. Some of them have a very rudimentary cytoskeleton, but it doesn't need to be super complex because they've already got a cell wall. Question? In fact, if I was to take a look at an animal cell and stain the animal cell cytoskeleton with fluorescent dyes and shoot a black light at it, this is what it looks like. It's actually a really common technique to dye it with things that shiny. So there you go. It is not just this thin little rigid layer right under the cell membrane. Really complex, really complex. Okay, so far. All right, so we talked cell membrane and other stuff that's associated with structure. Let's talk DNA. The most obvious organelle in a eukaryote is the nucleus. All eukaryotes have them at some point in their lives, although there are some cells that lose the nucleus, that's okay. What they do is protect the DNA. They keep it separate from everything else in the cytoplasm. Boom, moving on. Easy? Okay. I want you to picture this. Picture a robot. And I tell you, this robot is kind of humanoid. What does that mean? Hey, oid. If you hear oid, that means kind of like something else. In the case of the nucleoid region, it's nucleus-like, but it's not really a nucleus because it doesn't have a nuclear membrane. It doesn't have a membrane that separates it. So your nucleoid region is just an area of DNA that you're going to find in prokaryotic cells only. Same thing, it's just kind of where the enzymes that have to do with DNA are. Everything's just kind of compiled into that center section. So there is where bacteria keep their a bacteria's main chromosome is kind of like your clothes. Okay, you need it. That's what you need to be able to go out into the world. And they're kind of cool. Like, I think of it like this. Plasmids are like accessory DNA that some bacteria have. So this little guy right here, it's like a little accessory piece of DNA. Just gives it some pizzazz, maybe some antibiotic resistance or other types of pizzazz. Okay. All right. That's it for that. We're good? Keeping it quick. Okay. Let's talk Amazon. What does Amazon do? It started with just sales. But have you all heard of Amazon Basics? You can get like anything now, and Amazon brands it. So let's talk about why the organelles responsible for making, modifying, and moving material is like Amazon. We're going to start with this little factory worker right here, this one little ribosome. And it's really, really tiny, even under electron microscopes. These tiny little dots, that's all there is for the ribosomes. They're wee little dandy guys, okay? They're your workers. They're chilling at the assembly line, making it. They're taking the materials to make proteins, and they're putting it together, okay? Now in prokaryotes, that's all you really need. You just need someone putting crap together. In eukaryotes, we're a lot more cool. So what do? We have endoplasmic reticulum, which are layers of membranes that have ribosomes on them. So the ribosomes, they're just, cranking away, making whatever you need for Amazon or whatever Jeff Bezos needs to fill his pockets. And the endoplasmic reticulum is then kind of like the factory line, kind of like, the second step of making stuff. This is going to take those proteins that have started to be made, fold them, modify them, make them look ready to go. Okay? So ribosomes are making the proteins. The rough ER is the one that's going to be modifying those proteins. Why is it called the rough ER? The rough endoplasmic reticulum. Yeah.
Because it has ribosomes.
Even easier than that. Because it's rough. Why is it rough? Because it has those ribosomes attached. So what do you think it would be called if there weren't ribosomes attached? Gosh, you guys are so smart. No, it's totally not written on the board. You guys just figured it out because you're intuitive, and that's wonderful. So your smooth ER is the part of the ER that has no ribosomes. What does it do? Don't worry about it. Moving on. Okay? Know this guy. Know that the smooth one exists, but you don't really need to know the function if you're super curious. It's involved in making lipids and detoxifying, so your liver has a ton of it to be able to break down alcohol, which, along with wine, you know nothing about. So let's move on. Along with what? Anyway. All right. Finally, we've got the beautiful things that have been made in the Amazon facility. You got to get them shipped up, packed, and ready to go in their little smiley boxes, right? That's going to be the job of the Golgi apparatus or the Golgi body. What is the difference between the Golgi apparatus and the Golgi body? Incorrect. There is a difference. Golgi apparatus ends in the word apparatus. Golgi body ends in the word body. Functionally, they're the same. Okay. And what this is your packaging station at Amazon. It's taking everything, it's putting it into the box with the little smiley face, and that box is a vesicle. Okay. So we've got vesicles, vacuoles, and other baggies of stuff. These are your Amazon boxes. They come in different sizes, shapes. They have different contents in them. We could just say an Amazon box, kind of like vesicle, just a generic, or we can get really specific. A vacuole, that's like a huge Amazon box full of liquid. Kind of. This is going to be in plant cells, and it's taking up the majority of the cell, the majority of the cytoplasm. Lysosomes. What does lyso sound like? Lysol, right? What does Lysol do? So your lysosomes are vesicles that have stuff that helps break down waste material, essentially cleaning up the cell. Brilliant, right? Questions there? So we've got the ribosomes making the protein, the endoplasmic reticulum is modifying it, the Golgi is packaging it up into vesicles. Still so far so good? See, you guys are smart, I knew it. And then finally we need to get into the organelles that provide cellular energy. The one thing that I guarantee everybody knew coming in is that the mitochondria are the, okay, kinda. We'll get there. So to understand where mitochondria get their energy, we need to look at the chloroplast first. Chlorophyll, more like borophyll. Anyone reference? You make me sad. Okay. So the chloroplasts are found in all plant cells, and their job is to take sunlight to make sugar. Okay? Sunlight into sugar. That is the process of photosynthesis. That's more information than you need to know. All you need to know for chloroplast is that they're taking sunlight, making sugar. Okay? The mitochondria can then take those sugars to make usable energy. You are no longer allowed to tell me that anything makes energy. Mitochondria don't make energy, they make usable energy. The only time you can make energy is if you're completely destroying matter, doing some real Einstein crap, or if you're the Big Bang, which you're not. So moving on. Mitochondria are going to be found in all eukaryotic cells, and they're just taking sugar, burning it down, making usable energy. They are the powerhouse in terms of that ability. Okay. Questions, comments, concerns, thoughts?